Emotional intelligence is easiest to admire when everyone is calm. Its real shape appears in the group chat after a sharp message in the meeting where credit disappears and in the apology that would be easier to avoid. It is less a polished personality than a set of choices under pressure. If you are among people trying to respond with awareness instead of impulse, ask what this experience is responding to and what would make it more useful. That question opens a better conversation than another quick judgment about your personality. People sometimes reduce emotional intelligence to always being calm, agreeable, pleasant, or naturally good with every person. That conclusion is too small to explain the experience. Emotional intelligence involves noticing emotion, interpreting it with humility, and choosing behavior that fits both the feeling and the situation. It does not remove anger, conflict mistakes, or boundaries. The behavior can make sense without being ideal, and understanding its purpose does not excuse every consequence. There is no single personality type behind emotional intelligence. Temperament learning, stress relationships, culture, and practical circumstances can combine in different proportions. Treat this explanation as a framework, not a diagnosis, and keep only what matches the evidence of your life. Start with one possible mechanism. Emotionally intelligent people rarely react at peak intensity when a pause is available. Hold this first explanation lightly and compare it with what your body choices and energy actually do. Compare this first clue across several situations before deciding what it means. Watch how that looks in a workday. An angry reply is drafted, saved, and shortened after the body has had time to settle. In the first scene, the need beneath the behavior matters more than how the behavior looks from outside. Read the first scene through need timing and aftermath rather than appearance. A second layer is easy to miss. They rarely treat a first interpretation as confirmed knowledge about another person's motive. The second explanation becomes useful only when the same conditions repeatedly produce a similar response. Use the second clue only if it predicts more than one response. The experience becomes clearer in private. A coworker's silence is treated as missing information rather than immediate evidence of disrespect. The private scene reveals whether the response brings genuine recovery or merely delays discomfort. Use the private example to compare real recovery with delayed discomfort. The third piece concerns attention. They rarely confuse brutal delivery with courageous honesty. For the third explanation, distinguish what you observed from the meaning you assigned afterward. Keep observation and interpretation separate while testing the third clue. Social situations add another clue. Clear feedback is delivered without using humiliation to create authority. The social scene shows what happens when belonging, visibility, or another person's expectations enter the equation. Let the social example reveal the extra weight of belonging and visibility. Another part appears under pressure. They rarely assume that a strong feeling automatically proves every conclusion attached to it. This fourth possibility matters most when pressure changes the intensity, timing, or cost of the response. Pressure is the comparison point for the fourth clue. Now place the same response inside a stressful week. Jealousy is acknowledged as real, while the accusation it suggests is checked against evidence. The stressful week example separates a stable preference from a temporary response to depleted capacity. Use the stressful example to check whether depleted capacity changes the response. A final mechanism helps explain repetition. They rarely avoid repair simply because admitting impact feels uncomfortable. The fifth explanation should increase choice. Discard it if it only supplies a more sophisticated insult. A useful fifth clue creates options instead of another fixed identity. One final scene separates a trait from a trap. After a defensive conversation, one person returns and names the part they handled badly. The final scene asks whether the behavior remains flexible when circumstances, energy, or relationships change. Let the final example test whether choice remains available as circumstances change. To make the emotional intelligence pattern more precise, compare 3 conditions: a rested day, a depleted day, and a day spent with people who feel safe. Notice whether the response changes in speed, intensity, or cost. If it shifts with context, the context belongs in the explanation. That comparison prevents one difficult moment from becoming a permanent identity. Look for a counterexample to emotional intelligence as carefully as you look for confirmation. Remember a time when the usual response did not happen, happened less strongly, or ended sooner. Ask what was different about preparation, energy, environment. expectations, and support. A counterexample reveals the conditions that make greater choice possible. The hidden cost of emotional intelligence deserves equal honesty. The concept becomes harmful when it demands endless composure from one person while excusing disrespect from everyone around them. Preserve whatever the response protects, connects, restores, or clarifies. Change the portion, reducing freedom, straining trust, or moving you farther from what you value. Start by observing the pattern. Create a pause long enough to choose a response instead of exporting your nervous system into the room. A second step is practical. Replace mind reading with a question that allows the other person to supply information. Third, make the change specific. Make honesty specific, relevant, and proportionate rather than using truth as permission to wound. Fourth, make the new response repeatable. Validate the feeling while testing the story because emotions are signals rather than complete investigations. Fifth, use support carefully. Repair impact without turning the apology into a performance of your own shame. Sixth, review what actually happened. Keep boundaries. Emotional intelligence does not require absorbing repeated disrespect to prove maturity. Finally, know when more support is needed. Judge growth by shorter recovery, clearer choices, and more honest repair, not by never becoming activated. Emotionally intelligent people rarely abandon themselves merely to keep the room comfortable. Regulation and self-respect belong in the same skill set. Flexibility means choosing among several responses instead of being pushed into one move. An understandable response does not have to become the only move available. Try one 7-day experiment designed for emotional intelligence, but do not repeat a generic ritual every day. Choose one relevant action, use it in a real situation, and record the outcome. Keep, revise, or discard the experiment according to evidence rather than guilt. The next difficult moment will not ask whether you know the right vocabulary. It will ask what you do with the seconds between feeling and action. That small space is where emotional intelligence becomes visible. The goal is not a new label. It is enough understanding and flexibility to make a more deliberate next choice.